Good evening, everybody. My name is Chad Hartman. Here is a great opportunity for us to have 90 minutes on a topic that matters to all of us, racism. And this is a part of a series that Dr. Verna Price has been a part of. I hope you've had a chance to listen. I know I have with other hosts joining Dr. Price. We call it In the Room Where It Happened, Conversations on Racism That Matter. Chad Hartman with you. I now bring Dr. Price in the conversation. You might tell that our sound is just a little bit different because you can listen to us on WCCO radio. You can listen to us on radio.com. And every bit as important, you can watch us on Facebook Live at WCCO radio. So again, Facebook Live at WCCO radio. Dr. Price, this is a pleasure for me. I have thoroughly enjoyed your conversation so far. I've learned a great deal. I've been stimulated by the conversation. For the folks who have not had a chance to listen, and I know the majority of folks listening now have, tell people what your approach was with the conversations and what you want to address tonight.
Absolutely. Well, Chad, first of all, thanks for joining us in the show for the first time. It's good to have you. This actually show comes out of almost immediately following the assassination of George Floyd. I started getting a lot of conversations, a lot of phone calls from my white colleagues. And they were saying things like, Dr. Verna, I need a way to talk about this. I know something's going on. I'm seeing this in a whole new light. I don't know how to talk about it. So that resulted in my doing a webinar called, how white people can talk to white people about racism. And really it was a way to kind of engage. How can I get you to engage in this conversation around racism that most of us tend to run away from?
Yep.
And how can we come to this conversation with a place of grace, a place of understanding, and a place of wanting to learn more and know more so we can get to the outcome. The outcome is to eradicate and get racism out of our systems, because you know what? We're all amazing people and we are all amazing contributors to this country and to our society. And how can we rid our society of this thing called racism? So out of that, I got a call. I sent a note to my friend, Miss Shaletta, and I said, Miss Shaletta, you know what? I have this idea, and, what do you think? And sure, she connected with CCO, and I connected with you all, Shannon, the whole group. And before you knew it, we were having this conversation about what could we do? And I said, you know what? Let's just put it out there. Let's invite the community to have the conversation with us. So every month, we've been able to have this conversation around particular topics. Racism as it pertains to philanthropy, racism in corporate America, racism in education, so that we can get to the place where whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever ethnicity you are, you can have a conversation with grace and civility around racism as a result of engaging in these conversations. And tonight's conversation, Chad, I had no idea that this particular topic would land at this particular time in history for us. Right. Yes. And I kind of thought to myself, well, maybe we shouldn't do the show. Maybe we should move around the topics. And I thought, no, this is where it landed because this is where it's supposed to be. And this particular show, I had always wanted to co-host with my husband for a couple of reasons. One is because he's my husband. I think he's awesome. and two is because he has been firsthand in the criminal justice system, working with men and women who have been incarcerated in prisons, working with the Department of Corrections, working to help men and women change their lives, and then coming back into our organization, the Power People Leadership Institute, to really help them replant themselves into their community. So this particular topic is very, very close to his heart and close to our work. So I've asked him actually to co-host this work with me and to help guide us through these conversations. So I just want to introduce my husband, Brother Shane Martin Price, who is just an amazing community leader who, not only am I married to, but I fully respect and just honor the work that he does in our community. And sweetheart, go ahead. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. And I get certainly a kick out of listening to you develop your radio and television chops. You're doing an amazing job. You put a lot into that last few minutes there, and I was ready to take a break myself after I listened. but
Chad, we'll have a good time tonight too.
All right, Brother Shane, is she always this kind to you? Does she always lead up? Because I mean, that was a beautiful lead. And I also want to mention these flowers behind me here. We're talking about Shaletta.
Sure.
Shaletta sent me these beautiful flowers today. So Shaletta is in my heart all the time. But Brother Shane, is she this kind to you all the time? Because I might have to bring my significant other and take the note here. What do I need to do?
And Chad, thank you. That's a fast pitch right down the middle for me. Because let me tell you why. First of all, I put my wife up high, and then she seems to honor me as a result of it. So your wife's efforts are really driven by your own, and so hopefully we complement each other in that way. But let me just mention quickly, Chad, I spent about 18 years in the Hennepin County, the government's Department of Children and Family Services, and then also in the Office of Planning and Development. And in that office, we created something that you might remember that was introduced into the community probably about 2002. It was a research project, the only research project that I think has been done, certainly in Minnesota, but perhaps around the country as well, on the plight of the African-American male in Hennepin County specifically. It's called the African-American Men Project. Do you remember that?
You remember that, yep.
And so I worked on the research for that project initially, and then became the project coordinator after we launched it into the community. It was a powerful, powerful thing. Our research base was individuals from 18 to 30. That was the research. However, when we opened our doors and were finally ready to provide service, the people who showed up were, 35 and up. And we realized that we had opened up a door that a lot of people had been locked out of, and that our little staff, we had 4 people and myself, we just were overwhelmed with trying to respond to the population of African-American men in Hennepin County. What I will say to you that came out of that I think is important to this conversation is that research said the number one way for an African-American man to find his way to jail or prison in Hennepin County was a traffic stop. Mm-hmm. And I should say a failed traffic stop. Yep. DWB, driving while black. You've heard that acronym. And so here's what we did from that. We created what we called a restorative justice approach. We decided that we would bring the court, the Hennepin County District Court, into the community. So over at the North Point Health Center over on Penn Avenue, we brought the court into the community. On that day, we served 1,300 individuals. We had the Department of Motor Vehicles present. We had community service present. So you could come to court in your community, resolve your issue, receive community service that was also in your community, and then restore your driver's license right then and there. And I'll tell you, even to this day, that's been many years ago now, but to this day, I will run into individuals, African-American men who I have forgotten, who will say to me, Brother Shane, thank you for my driver's license. Thank you for being able to set me up with my driver's license. And it reminds me of how critical this, what we would think is a small thing, but somehow to the African-American community, honey, and Chad, it's a huge thing because it creates the tension and the friction between African-American men, especially, now women included, and the police. I'll stop right there because I want to, and honey, I want you to help me direct the conversation and bring in our other guests as you see fit.
Absolutely. Well, that is my husband, Brother Shane Martin Price. And this conversation tonight is on racism in the criminal justice system.
Right.
What does it mean? What is the history of racism in the criminal justice system? How does racism show itself up in our communities? How does racism show itself up in how we police communities, particularly communities of color? And then what can we do? Bottom line is, what can we do to eradicate racism from our criminal justice system? And we're going to do that in a couple of ways. First, we're going to have my husband just kind of give a brief overview of what is the history of racism in the criminal justice system. And then we're going to invite our guest in, amazing guest, to actually start the first round of conversations on why does it exist and how does it show up in our everyday systems right now. So, sweetheart, go ahead and just give us that historical context so we're all on the same page.
Sure. And you know, I shared this information with you and the listeners with some trepidation because it's so painful. You get it? But America's experience with enslaving Black people, that goes back to at least the year 1619. And that connection between the history of the criminal justice system and the African American begins, listen at this, with the Constitution, right? Now we already know slavery was prevalent in this country. If I could change the name from slave for a minute and change it to kidnap victim, it would help you appreciate what was taking place in a different context. So these kidnap victims who were enslaved, now in the U.S., first the continental U.S., the 13 original colonies, and later under the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution in Article 2, Section 2, Paragraph 3, it reads this, and I'm quoting the Constitution here: "No person held in service or in labor in one state under the law thereof, escaping into another, shall be in consequence of any law or regulation therein be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up." That's the key point here. "Shall be delivered up upon claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due." And so what that really said in our Constitution is, if this kidnap victim, if this human tried to run from his condition or her condition, that in fact, this person would be delivered up, right? And if you tried to run, they sent the slave patrols, right? These slave patrols, or these kidnap patrols, became the construct for the creation of the police department, especially in the South. These patrollers who would look for kidnap victims were given a type of a badge and some credentials, some written credentials that would help them show other states and other authorities at that time, whoever it may be, local individuals, that they had the authority to bring back the kidnap victim, right? Dead or alive, mostly, beaten and alive, right? And so this, if you can hear what I'm saying, it's right here in the Constitution where the rub between African Americans and the criminal justice system begin.
So let me ask this. Let me chime in, because that was laid out beautifully.
Please do.
When we have issues that happen today in Hennepin County, other places across the country, where it's very clear one of the citizens, is a Black man or Black woman, is treated differently than whites. And the data in Hennepin County is very clear. It is not even up for debate. Do we think that's because of this horrific pattern and what we established some 200 plus years ago? Or do we think it's inherent into how people either have been raised now or the beliefs they have during their current life? Because that, I think, is an interesting question, when it's whether it's just been passed along for not literally hundreds of years, or it's somehow someone is born, someone is now a part of this, and decides that they're going to treat someone with disdain and disrespect for one reason, because of the color of their skin.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think that it's not an either or, Chad, to your question, but rather a both and. Sure. I think that the ingrained, the construct that was set up between black and white was so dynamic. It was so brutal. It was so vicious, and it lasted for hundreds of years. And because of that, it colored the thinking of especially in the southern states initially, it colored the thinking to a degree that it was passed, just as you indicated, from generation to generation, that there was some disdain. They are the other. They're not included. I think about the young man who was jogging. What's that man's name? Ahmaud, who was jogging down
Ahmaud Arbery.
Ahmaud Arbery, who was jogging, going for a run.
Yep.
And, you know, just two guys thought, hey, there he is. There's the nigger.
Let's not forget, Dr. Price, that story only saw the light of day because of the video.
Mm-hmm.
Because the actual hunting down of him, because that's what it was, tracking him down, had happened weeks before. And at the time, there were no charges filed.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
When the video came out, the area reacted and the country reacted. And that's really the only reason why charges happen. That can't be it. It can't be because a camera catches something where someone is defiled and murdered. That can't be the only reason why individuals who committed criminality are charged. That's unacceptable.
And Andy, may I?
Go ahead.
Chad, first of all, I just appreciate how informed you are, about that case, and that I appreciate that. But I think you're right in believing that this cell phone here has created a different reality for those people who were able to discharge things that they didn't see.
Yeah. And
that the cell phone brings proximity and allows you it takes away your ability to deny that these things are actually taking place. And I'll say one more thing and then ask you to chime in, honey. The one thing that was different about George Floyd, if you think back, Chad, to the Vietnam War, there were a lot of European protesters, some African Americans. Mm-hmm. If you think back to the civil rights movement, there were a lot of African Americans, some Europeans. But when it came to George Floyd, the cell phone changed the dynamic. And for the first time, you've seen as many Europeans as it was African Americans who were protesting and demonstrating. And in some cases, in states where African Americans don't have a population, the Europeans were protesting on their own. And so I believe the cell phone in some ways has brought some people who were able to sit on the fence and not really see or believe what was taking place, and force them in a good way, to come out and demonstrate and take this thing seriously. To the second part of your question, I would say this, and that is, it would be my hope and desire. We have a 12-year-old daughter, right? She's vibrant and lovely and a dancer, and she has aspirations. And we want to see her obtain those aspirations. And it hurts, Chad, that we still have to fight this fight on her behalf. But yet here we are trying to make things better. And hopefully the conversation we're having tonight is the beginning of that for somebody.
Dr. Price.
Sure, absolutely. And that is, if you think about how socialization is passed on, right? So you think in the context of exactly how do we get to the place where we believe this or believe that, or we see a certain people a certain way. So that's a socialization process. And in that socialization process, we've been socialized as a country in the construct of racism. So when we define racism, which was intentionally put in place as a construct to divide a nation, to divide a people, for the purposes of wealth building and the purposes of prosperity for a particular group of people. And in our country, that group of people were white men, mostly. So that construct then that was embedded in our society was racial prejudice. In other words, we are prejudiced against you simply because you are a different ethnicity, simply because you're brown. That's it. Right? That racial prejudice was then legally connected to the power systems. So when you think about now, we have legalized the fact that if you're a certain color, you can't go over there. So then if you go over there, then legally we use the power systems, criminal justice systems, to legally take you from that counter, take you out of that school, take you from wherever you're not supposed to be because of our racial prejudice against you. And then we're going to what? We're going to make a consequence, a legal consequence for you that is going to be detrimental to your life, but better for us. So within this construct of racism, then that is then racism that's embedded. So when you think about like, don't people know better? Well, I do believe that people in their heart of hearts, on the surface, I think that most white people on the surface want to do good. They want to do the right thing. However, underneath the underlying lessons that they've been taught in many of them in these quiet, unspoken ways, is that we should have prejudice against a particular group of people, and that particular group of people is less than, so forth and so on. So it's okay to do this and do that. So that kind of construct that exists then ties us in this relationship with racism and the criminal justice system. Now the question is, how is it showing up? And as I bring our other guests in, for them to really kind of, on the first round of conversation, just talk a little bit about their own kind of reaction to the conversation we were just having and why they chose to come to this conversation this evening. We have Leslie Redmond, who is a activist and a civil rights lawyer, attorney, and she had a very specific role last summer when all of America and the world erupted over the assassination of George Floyd, and she'll talk about that. And then we also have joining us a retired Miss Rowena Holmes, who's a retired crime prevention specialist with the city of Minneapolis, who I've known for a very long time and who has been a lead mentor and a volunteer with Girls Taking Action, but who has been in the community doing this sort of work for quite some time. And then I also would like to introduce Mike Friesleben, who is a retired police inspector with the Minneapolis Police Department, 4th Precinct. So I'm going to go ahead and start with you, Ms. Leslie, just reactions, thoughts, and why we even this was a hard call for me to make. So to have you come to this conversation, because I knew it was going to be a deep one, but why you chose to come and some reactions to this conversation.
Grace and peace, everyone. Grace and peace. I just want to say I really was enjoying the conversation. I actually could have just stayed backstage and listened to the three of you all tonight, because I think that you all were dead on. And it's very important that we address root issues, right? Many people know me as the former president for the Minneapolis NAACP. But one of the ways I like to describe myself is as a kingdom building millennial, because root of this issue is white supremacy. And at the root of white supremacy is a violation against God and humanity. And I have to say that, right? Because this is not just a violation against Black people, right? But us dehumanizing people, us destroying people, us killing people, right? This is the ultimate sin against God and humanity. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm so dead set on Black liberation. It's one of the reasons why the founders of the NAACP, who were both white and Black people who understood that the violence and the brutality that the Black community was facing was not our burden alone, right? And this history is so deep and it's so rich. And I really need people, specifically our white brothers and sisters, to go and do the history and do the research, because really, by no fault of your own, you're not getting the real story. You're not understanding what's really going on. And in a place like the United States of America, and in a place like Minnesota that I call the white Wakanda, there has been a very intentional effort to rewrite history, to lie about what is going on. There's a saying, men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie, but I say they can be misleading, right? So when you have a place like Minnesota that prides itself on having some of the lowest prison populations, but has some of the highest probation rates in the nation, that's something that you have to dive into. When you have a place where you have some of the best park services, some of the best education, some of the best health centers, more Fortune 500 companies per capita than any other state, but in this same place, you have some of the worst racial disparities. You have to start asking questions. And you can't wait until you see the knee of Officer Chauvin on Brother George Floyd's neck, because the knees of Black or white people and white supremacy have been on the necks of Black bodies for far too long. It goes way back to the 1830s with Dred Scott and Harriet Scott in Fort Snelling.
All right, Miss Leslie, I'm going to stop you right there. Miss Leslie, I'm going to stop you right there for a minute. And then I'm going to real quick, and we're going to come back to that. We have 3 minutes here, and I'm going to just have Miss Rowena quick introduce herself and just give us a quick reaction, and then Mike, and then we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back to you, Miss Leslie. Go ahead.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's an honor to be here. And I, like Leslie, could have listened to you and Brother Shane for the entire time period, because you're very thoughtful and reflective, and you're calling it like it is. I think for me, in the job that I had for 30 years, I was a crime prevention specialist. And as a crime prevention specialist, I was assigned to a group of neighborhoods. That group of neighborhoods was very diverse. We had some millionaires, and then we had people who were barely existing at the poverty level. And I was expected to treat everyone the same. Well, you really can't treat everyone the same when something like that is happening. And I prided myself, and I still do, on being a social worker at the 4th Precinct, because I've always felt that people will do better when they know better. When I would be outside putting books in the little free library, I'd always stop and say hi to people. I'd say hi to young men walking by, say, hello, sir, how are you today? And they'd like take a double take, sir? Probably no one's ever called them sir.
Right.
And I'd say hello to the women and the little children. And because I'm a grandmother, and because it's so passionate to me, I'm a lover of people, I would keep that book stand filled with books and magazines, relevant magazines, because I realized that some people in my community, the community that I served, couldn't read.
Now, Ms. Rowena, I'm gonna stop you right there, because we're gonna be talking about how. This is,
Okay.
exactly some examples. And when we come back from our short break here, I am going to start with Mike and have you introduce yourself and give us some reflections, and we will be back very soon.
Absolutely. I'll jump in right here. This is an important topic in the room where it happened. Conversation on racism, that matters, right? We've just started. We have another 60 minutes. You obviously can chime in different ways through text and listening, but I'm really enjoying the conversation right now, and it will continue. What we have coming up is a brief CBS update, then a quick local update, and right around 7:05. We'll be back right here on News Talk 830 WCCO. I feel very fortunate, to be a part of this conversation, continuing with Dr. Verna Price after that brief pause in the room where it happened. Conversation on racism that matter. This is a continuing series that Dr. Price has been a part of with a number of other hosts. We have a great panel. Dr. Price heard a lot of very important things in the first 30 minutes. We still have one last participant to bring in. So let's bring in our last participant and we'll continue the dialogue.
Absolutely, Mike. And this is my first time meeting you, Mike. And so we've only met on the telephone. We had a great conversation there. But I know that you've been doing good work in the community for quite some time. And when I talked with Miss Rowena about who should we get on the show and who's brave and courageous enough to come and have this conversation with us, and a former police officer. So thank you so much for coming. Your thoughts, your overall thoughts on that first segment in that conversation, and why you said yes. You didn't have to, you really didn't, and why you said yes, Mike.
I said yes for number one, I believe for what's right. And there's certainly a lot of things broken in our society, especially our country. Also, when you call, it was an honor. It was an honor to listen to you talk. And so it was an honor to be here. But my thoughts are, and listen to Brother Shane, is at some point we keep saying, how do we fix this? And we keep failing. But the first step is to remember history. We can't ignore history. And you know, the police department was started by getting groups of men, white men, to hunt down, you know, slaves, or, you know, the term kidnapped persons. I never thought about that, but that makes so much sense right now. And I think it was kidnapped persons in the beginning, but now that history has led to really slavery in areas where people are put. And so they were, you know, if we can't understand the history that for African Americans, the first, you know, police contacts were people hunting them down with dogs too. Don't forget about the dog part. And then also they were used to make sure there wasn't riots or any disruptions on the plantation. And then they were used to lay down punishment for the, you know, so that, you know, that's led to the way we police, you know, now today. That's never really changed much. If you really think about how we arrest, why we arrest, where we arrest. And so if we really got to watch that history, because you saw, you know, you see the black and white, you know, TV pictures of Martin Luther King's March Across the Bridge, and you see dogs being used again on people who are just, you know, their constitutional right is to protest peaceably. Absolutely. And you see that same force that you'd have seen in, you know, in the 1800s. I mean, there's no difference right now. So I'm proud to be here because I really want to help, and I want, you know, things to be set right, and we need a lot of brave people to fight this battle.
Absolutely. Well, I sure appreciate the fact that you are real about it, you know, and I was telling Chad earlier on his show is that this is not easy to do. And if it were, we would have all done it a long time ago, right? This is not easy to do. And this is not personal per se. You know, we're not after one particular person or one particular personality. We're talking about our society here. We're talking about something that's systemic, and understanding, having knowledge, information about the history is really, really critical. And I know one of those persons who have that history is Miss Leslie Redmond. And because she's done this research, she's done the work, and just the next really big question, because people will say to me about this show, you know, Dr. Verna, don't you think that we're past it now? Don't you think we can like keep moving beyond this conversation? Like we really, you know, it's okay now. Well, actually, no, it's not okay now. And the truth is that we haven't gotten deep enough in the conversation so we can change the narrative of who we are as a society. So the question of like, how does it continue to show up? We know it's there. We know it's in our foundation. How and why does it continue to perpetuate itself in the systems? And so I'm going to have Miss Leslie kind of start on that. And then, sweetheart, I'm going to turn it over to you to go from there.
Sure.
Ms. Leslie?
Okay, I'm going to try to make this as concise as possible. I think that it would be beneficial to start off with what Brother Price was saying, right? When I heard him talking about the early 2000s doing these, I'm not sure what you all called them, but we called them in 2015 warrant forgiveness days, right? Where we would bring the county and be able to clear the warrants, because the ACLU did this study looking at Hennepin County, specifically recognizing that Black people were disproportionately impacted by these warrants for low-level offenses, right? These were things like driving without a license, litter, not having insurance, really crimes on poverty, right? So when I talk about the root issues, poverty is one of those root issues. And you know, someone who a lot of people familiar with, Aristotle, said poverty is the parent of crime and revolution, right? And we still have those same issues that exist today. And when I think about the history and how it connects to today, I'm always reminded of the 13th Amendment that theoretically abolished slavery, but created a caveat by saying, except if you're duly convicted of a crime. And then the mass incarceration of the descendants of those very same people. So my thing is, Black people have never been freed on American soil. The systems have just transformed, as Michelle Alexander talks about in the new Jim Crow, which I really urge you all to go read. I talked to a judge one time. For those of you that don't know, I'm a licensed attorney as well. And back in law school, I was mentored by a judge that's on the Minnesota Supreme Court. And I told her, I don't know how all of you haven't read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Like, how are we having people in power that really don't understand the disparities and the issues? And for me, you know, I know with law, people like to use plausible deniability. It's not okay to deny anymore. You need to acknowledge not only our enslavement on this soil for over 400 years, but the bondage that we are still in today.
Right. I hear you. And absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I am just so encouraged by Sister Redmond. She is a young, brilliant mind. And I'm just encouraged by you when, you know, as whatever that is you put your hands to, you know, you always are on the right side of it. And I appreciate that. And maybe we can get you before the end of the show, not now, but before the end of the show, you might share with us what brought you to become a lawyer in the first place. And it just is a question I've always wanted to know. But let me say this. I'm from Minneapolis. This is my hometown. You know, I'm proud of that. You know what I mean? You're always proud of your hometown, wherever that is. I'm from Minneapolis. I was born here in Minnesota. And I'm a North Sider too, by the way. And you all heard about the North Side, right? And so, yeah, I'm from the NFL. Yeah, North Side for life. And so...
And sweetheart, yeah, I'm going to stop you right there. North Side for life. We're going to come right back. You're in the room where it happened, and it is happening right now in this room. So we will be right back in a moment.
I got you.
Welcome back, everybody. Chad Hartman along with Dr. Verna Price in the room where it happened. Conversation on racism that mattered. Brother Shane, you just were talking. I want you to expand on that.
Yeah.
I also want you to expand on this idea because your wife makes such a good point on this. The courage for people to address this.
Sure.
The courage for people to have these uncomfortable conversations. Are we better now in 2021 than, let's say, in 2002 when you were a part of that report in having these conversations?
That's an excellent question. Let me mention to you the reason why I acknowledge my hometown the way that I do is because of the stereotype, the negative stereotype that is associated with the North Side. And you know, have you noticed, Chad, that whenever you hear anything about the North Side,
yes,
mostly it's negative news. It's a homicide, it's a robbery, it's a break-in. And, you know, and crime is something that plagues us all as Americans. You get it. Yeah. But I say that But I say that because I want to further build on the point, and I'm headed your way, Rowena, because I want to further build on the point that this whole notion about Blacks, this is the North Side connotation, that's where they live. The whole idea in some ways is that it's all negative. Nothing good can come out of the North Side. You get it? And I just want to say to you, that I think that's a misnomer, and that the press plays a role, an important role, in helping to reframe the humanity of a people whose aspirations are the same as yours. I have the exact same aspirations you do. I want to earn a good living. I want to have health care for my family. I want to provide my children a college education. I want my 12-year-old to become her best self. And I don't think that you think any different about your children. Exactly. And so in my work to change paradigms on the North Side, I created something many years ago. It was in 1995, by the way, called the West Broadway March for Peace and Social Justice. And so to do it, I needed all these permits to take over the street and to march and to do all of this. And at the time, I didn't really have all of that information. So I had to reach out to my community crime prevention specialist, who just also happened to be a friend of mine. And Rowena, you remember those days. And you were sharing with us before one of the breaks how your work in trying to encourage those young men on the North Side to see themselves differently, and then how we partnered in that in some ways way back. I want you to get back to that story in a way, and then I want to ask another question if I can.
Absolutely. For me, it's important that Black men see themselves as worthy, that they see themselves as able to take care of their family and do those things, those aspirations, Shane, that you talked about. And many young Black men, they haven't had the chance, or they don't know how, or their life story has been negative. So for me, to treat those young Black men with respect and talk with them and see what they want for their families. So I always would be engaged in a conversation, whether it was the books that I was putting in the little free library, or whether it was the marquee. And for those young men who didn't read, I told them we would have Sports Illustrated or something there that they could look at the pictures. And so looking at the pictures, they may want to read, or they may even teach themselves to read that way. Because there's a lot of shame in our community around the things that we can't do, but people assume that we can do or should be doing, and we don't know how to do them. So that's how that started. And the West Broadway March for Peace, there were a few of them, and they were very successful. And they brought everybody in. Everyone who cared about West Broadway was asked to participate in it. And I remember a time where it ended around 3:00 in the morning. We're done eating and conversing, and everyone's tired and ready to go home. But we had a good time. And we were doing this for each other, because I'm a North Side for life too.
Come on now.
30 years, Minneapolis Police Department, North Side. And I lived in North Minneapolis for many, many years. My youngest son, a graduate of North High.
All right.
And captain of the football team. So we lived, breathed, and died North Minneapolis. That's how we felt about it. And it's passionate because we care so much about it. And we know that North Minneapolis has so much potential. Those young men walking down the street who aren't doing anything, they could be going to school to learn a trade.
Right.
They could be doing much more than what we're doing, what they are doing. So it's important to reach out and just treat them with respect.
Sure.
And honor like we would treat anybody. So I've always done that. And I've always been, I guess, a problem solver who would come to me, how can we do this? How can we do that? Not that it was part of my job description. It's part of who I am. And I think it's important that we continue telling North Side story. Know me, N-O-M-I, we're know-me's. And it's important that we keep coming together. And right now, during the Chauvin trial, we have to continually tell each other how important and loved we are. Because we don't want anything. We don't want to go through the riots and all of the pain and suffering we did last summer. We don't want that again. So these conversations, Dr. Verna and Brother Shane, that you're having are good. It's good for young people to hear this. It's good for them to realize, hey, I could probably go to Summit OIC if I'm not interested in going to college, because college is not for everybody, but everybody should be able to have further education so that they can take care of themselves and their family. And everybody should make that good living. And I think it's important that young men who aren't wanting to go to college can find a trade.
Sure.
And do something constructive.
You
Absolutely.
raise a good point, and we're going to double back to it, and that is the whole idea of trade school education, which used to exist here in Minneapolis. Coach there would remember Vocational High School downtown, which provided dry cleaning, carpentry, and a host of other things. It was a great institution. But I want to kind of tie you back, Coach, to your duality of roles here, because you have with you as an officer, and just be honest with me, and just why did the force in the 4th precinct, why were they so adverse to us as African Americans from your perspective?
From my perspective, you look at, and it goes back to history, that slavery didn't really end. It just changed like where you could live. And you were a slave to that area because you couldn't afford a condo downtown, or you couldn't afford to buy a house. And so you go back to, one of the things is, does it continue to show up, and racism show up in our current system? And you look at back in around 1990, when crack was really taking over. And we looked at big Eastern city, came up with a thing called Code 4. And I was a young officer. We had a lot of young officers in because there was a big retirement rush there. So we had a lot of young officers. And Code 4 was in that city. It was one of the most violent cities in the world. They just arrest everybody for everything. It doesn't matter if they throw a gum on the ground, if they shoot, if they, and that's how we were going to clean up neighborhoods. And that ultimately led us into neighborhoods that were mainly African-American neighborhoods. Because that's where they all these stat meetings, they would tell you, here's where the most of our crime is. And it didn't say if it's violent or if it's minor, it just said crime, and so that's where we put all our, our people power. And I mean, that was our directive, and we just arrested everybody. And that wasn't, years later, that wasn't it didn't work.
Right.
You can put the crime maps on the area prior to doing that and put them after. There was no change in crime. It's just a lot more people were put in the system. And unfortunately, it was in an area that was mainly African American. And, and as you're a young cop, you just go, right? And for me, I had a mom who was so kind. Like I would have to, after my roll call ended at 7:30 and then at night, I worked 7:30 until 3:30 in the morning. And right after the roll call, I'd have to go to Chicago and Lake and get my mom because she was at Chicago and Lake, and that was a rough area. because each corner was a different gang territory, and it was
Sure.
just drugs, prostitution, and she would be like out there with the people. Here's $1. I go, Mom, we gotta go home, And so she started to instill in me that, we have to be kind. We just have to be kind. I mean, you want to fix the world, be kind. Be kind. And I had a mentor, old police sergeant, when I was a young boy. He taught me the same thing. He taught me, like, treat everybody like it's your mom. Even if you have to fight with them, once the cuffs are on, treat them like your mom. And for me, I was a really hardworking cop, but I also, I got it early that in these areas, and I'll give a great example. I tried to give the cops, and you say, you don't really have to tag everybody, because learn the system. Our system's broken. Our system's to make money for somebody. The prison system is to make money for somebody. Tickets are to make money for somebody. And it's like, understand tickets. So if you get your license suspended, what most police officers don't understand, they don't go look at the other end of it, is it's about $2,400 to try to get your license back.
Right.
Sure.
And
sure.
Even if you're rich, that's a lot of money. If you don't have a lot of money, that's an enormous amount of money. So you don't have a choice but to keep driving your car to try to get to work without a license, or maybe not even insurance. And is that the biggest problem in our world? It's not. It's not a violent crime. And what I really tried to push is, like, don't in front of little children. If the children are there, if you don't have to arrest, don't.
Okay. And Mike, I'm going to stop you right there. That's such a critical point. I want to come back to exactly what was your mom teaching you? What was the real story behind her being on that corner? And what was she trying to teach you and to teach the community as well? You're in the room where it happened. And I am joined by Chad Hartman, who is co-hosting with me, and this amazing panel with my husband as well. We're talking about racism and the criminal justice system. And when we come back, we want to talk a little bit more about how it's showing up. And then we're going to finish up this show talking about what can we do about it? What can we do to create the change that's needed? So thank you so much for joining us, and keep watching. We will be back shortly. Chad, any thoughts? Any thoughts from you as we go out?
No, I think Mike made such an important point too, on many things about treating people like your mother. And also the part that stood out most to me, Dr. Price, is we just went to the area. The crime didn't draw us to the area. We went to the area.
Yeah.
Right.
That seems so counter to me.
Wow.
You should be available. You should be mobile. But if you're saying we're just going to one spot and we're going to find people, versus we're going to wait until the day takes us somewhere, and it's not a specific reason you're going there, that is a frightening part that everybody in our audience needs to hear and realize. That wasn't that long ago. That was a few decades in the Minneapolis police. Mike, is that still happening now?
Code 4, it's been changed quite a bit. It's been changed to the, try to not, like, continue that, but it's not completely gone, and you're right. There's sometimes we have to be, gang A and B are trying to take over. There's a shooting, this and that. There's times we have to be there, but most of the time we could just be helping people. I mean, the bottom line is, like, the more we serve, the less we would have to protect. If we could just get it into our heads that what used to be on our car door was protect and serve. If we served our community more and more, we'd protect less.
Let's do that. Let's pause on that point, and we'll come right back and let Dr. Price set the next point. You are listening to In the Room Where It Happened, conversations on racism that matter here on CCO. We continue. It's time for our final segment, but it's a lengthy segment. We've got about 20 minutes to go. Please be joined by just this great cast. And I know, Brother Shane, you wanted to jump in first, so go ahead. Lead us to the next part of our conversation, sir.
Well, I just wanted to say to the coach, I just really appreciated your candor. And we really need that kind of genuine conversation. Let me say to all of our listeners and to the coach as well, Scripture says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. And I believe that some people are called to corrections in a particular kind of way, and that we need them because of that call. I would just share quickly before we head to Sister Leslie, is that Mike mentioned the crack pandemic that hit the country, but mostly it was sold and imported into the country for the purpose of supporting the Iran-Contra war. This is during the Reagan administration. Right. And, you know, unfortunately, that product was directed for sale toward Black and brown people. And it did what it was supposed to do, Chad. It addicted us. And it caused our community to go into complete chaos, Mike. I had to make that point to come behind your honesty. And then you see when a community is now addicted and there is chaos erupting because of that addiction, police are responding in a heavy-handed way. And then we have this clash of personalities and ideologies coming together to cause this mass incarceration, which we'll talk a lot more about on our next show coming up a couple of weeks from now. But Sister Leslie, you know, it just impresses upon me that somehow you found a desire in your heart so strong, and it's strong, so strong that you would take your talent back to school and become an attorney. But I wonder if you would share with us why you did that, and maybe it helps somebody else who's in our listening audience.
100%. And I just want to say that I love the North Side as well. And I would love for our viewers, go Google redlining, go Google racial covenants, right? Not by coincidence. When we talk about things that are current and why Black people are all concentrated in Minneapolis, it's a reason, and it's a racial reason, and it's white supremacy behind that. So I just had to say that. So, you know, God really planted the seed in my heart. I'm from the inner city of Washington, D.C., born and raised. I'm a first generation college graduate. My grandparents were all from the South, a part of the Great Migration from North Carolina, South Carolina, Houston, Texas, migrated with maybe 7th, 8th grade educations. My parents have high school diplomas. And growing up in the inner city of DC, I saw firsthand the war on drugs, what gentrification looked like, poverty, everything that you could think of. And in 4th grade, I asked my big mom about one of my favorite cousins who was always in and out of the criminal justice system, Kevin. I said, Big Mom, who decides if Kevin goes to jail or not? And she said, the judge. And I said, well, I'm going to be a judge then, because something is wrong. This is why we have to listen to the kids, because even though I didn't know the terminology, I knew something was very wrong with the system. And one thing we often don't talk about is the Black women and how Black women are impacted by this system. And long before Kevin was in and out of the criminal justice system, my Aunt Renee was in the criminal justice system because she was raped by an older Black male in our family. And we know the secrets of families and how those things happen, and her retaliating from that is what ended up her incarcerated. So for me, it's a long cycle. I feel like I was called to this work, not that it was drawn or not that I sought it out. And, you know, I accidentally ended up in Minnesota on my behalf. I thought I was applying to St. Thomas in Miami. God had me apply.
It's called destiny.
I love it. I love it.
That is called destiny, Ms. Leslie.
Yeah, and I'm certainly glad that happened. I'm sorry to say, I appreciate that happened. I really do.
Absolutely.
So I'm not sure Leslie feels the same way on January 15th.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, DC can get chilly.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I want to, sweetheart, I want to get back to Mike's mom.
Sure.
On the corner. Right. And fundamentally, what was she doing? And what was she teaching you in that moment? And what she was really doing was she was defying the construct of racism.
Wow.
And the construct of racism says that only one group of people are truly human. And so then what you do is you protect the humans. And when you come up against that construct, what you're saying is that every person, every human being is a true human. They are totally full human. So what she was actually demonstrating was, what does it really mean? What does it really mean to honor and respect humanity, regardless of the color, culture, humanity? And she was teaching you that no matter who those people were, what they looked like or smelled like, they were full human beings, and they deserved to be treated as such, as though they were fully human. And when we think about the criminal justice system, and we think about where we have come in this system, the reason that racism has been perpetuated because somewhere in the unwritten, unspoken language of the criminal justice system, there is this very strong message that says that maybe, probably, more than likely, anyone who is non-white is not fully human. And they should be treated as such. And they, therefore, must be policed, because we have to keep an eye. Because so when we look at the construct, it all kind of goes right back to what? The ownership of slaves who were not fully human. So when so move us back here to 2021, if we are to really eradicate racism from the criminal justice system, then there are some things we must do to create new narrative, to create new information, to create new paradigms around what does it mean to take care of humanity, which is all of us. So I'm just going to put that on the table here as we think about the conversation is, what do we do now? We know it's there. What can we do right now? And for all of us, we all have a part to play. My white brothers and sisters, you must do this work to eradicate racism. It cannot happen without my white brothers and sisters. And for my Black brothers and sisters, we must do the work to eradicate racism, because we have internalized the pain of it. And now it's beginning to actually create things in us and ways in us. We've got to go after that too. So we all get to do this work. So I'm just going to put that on here for our panel. What do we do now?
And sweetheart, I think you asked Mike a question, and I want to just redirect, and Mike, then you can lead into my wife's secondary question. But go back to your mom there. I think we all wanted to hear just a little bit about why she did what she did in your mind.
Well, first of all, she was an amazing woman. We didn't know about our real dad till I was 26. And that's a whole funny story, because it was on my final interview to be a police officer. I didn't know that. And they go, and she calls me, that's not your real name. So that's a different day.
Oh, wow.
But then her next choice was violent man. And so for her and my brothers and sisters, she worked like 2, 3, 4 waitressing jobs. She worked all the time for us. But like I said, I have to go to Chicago and Lake every night. And like, Mom, that's a prostitute, that's like a murderer. And she goes, these are my friends, Right. And she could navigate through it, but she taught me to be kind that way. She taught me to think about, like, she'd say, Mike, like, your worst day is way better than these guys' best day. I mean, and she'd pun that. And I'll be honest too, even when I was young as 5 years old, she gave me a St. Michael medal. I still have it. And she, from age 5, I remember every day she would tell me, you were put on earth to protect people. And so that led really to how I went from the Code 4 era. Even then I was kind when, it was time to be kind, but to to when I became the commander of the precinct. What got me there is when I became a lieutenant and when you talk about what do we do now, and I'm going to talk about just the police, what the police do now.
Sure.
As a lieutenant, I started going to all these community meetings. And Rowena can tell you, I would go, it's like hours and hours and hours. And most of it I did when the community events, I tried to do them when it wasn't my working hours, because during the working hours, I'm just getting paid to be a cop to be there. When it's your own time, that's what my mom taught me. Do stuff like that on your own time. Then it means something. You know, even when I was a young cop, I go, yeah, I went to these things. And she goes, well, you're on duty. You're just getting paid. That doesn't mean anything to me. Go there when it's not your time. And so not only myself, I started sending all my officers to community events. And this is where I think is for the police department, the way to start equalizing this and making our communities safer and go back to serving more than protecting is when you start to get to know people, everything changes. I mean, because you're right, the north side, in the media, the north side. When something happens on the south side, they say that neighborhood. Right. You know, the Johnson neighborhood. But north side, it's the whole north side, you know. And I attacked that when I was an inspector. That came to kind of an end. But going to community meetings, and particularly with kids, getting in these schools, because when you make a friend with a second grader, that guy or gal is your friend for life. Even let's say they become a hardened person at age 17 or 8, they're still your friend. They still act different around you. They still call, you know, That's Mike, right. You know, and so getting our cops out there. I mean, I can remember getting invited to people's houses to eat. One day a lady just goes, will you come and eat with our inspector? We know you, you don't know us. Will you come and eat? I did. And it was amazing. It was amazing the friendships I made. And even the cops, you know, that do this, like, when they were going to the events, they were telling me, you know what, this is fun. This is working. They're making friends. And those people aren't going to be the ones that throw a rock at you, even if they're mad at you, you know, they're not, they're going to be your friends for life. And it just, I think that is the solve here. Get into the schools, read to kids, just be there for lunch. Kids will love you. They will love you. And adults will too. I mean, they just want to know that you're there and you're for them. And that every time you see a cop, it shouldn't be because we're stopping you to be mean. I mean, imagine if you took all your cops and every day you told them to get out of the car and just randomly shake 10 people's hands and go, hi, it's Officer Mike Freeside. Whether it's, I'll put categories that we put sometimes people put. If it's like the lowest person, you think they're the lowest person or the highest, it doesn't matter. Just randomly shake hands. If you did that for a month, even like if we're going to say the north side has a lot of crime, the north side would change just based on that. Just getting out there and being human.
And Mike, let me ask you a question. And so I want you to talk just briefly, if you can, why you left the force. But before you do, I want to say this to you and to our listening audience. And Chad, I want you to hear this as well, because if I just took the athletes from the north side who have become immensely successful in either the NBA or the NFL, you know, if I just brought them into one place and began to share them with their own community, this is the role the press has got to play. And, you know, there are a great number of tremendous athletes who've gone on to do great things in professional sports from the north side. I'm only using athletes, you know, just because I know that Mike is coaching right now over with, I think, with Coach McKenzie at the Minneapolis North basketball team. And you know what's important about North's basketball team is that they're perennial champions. They win the conference every year. We expect that. And those men are held, I believe, to a 3.0 or grade point average. And almost all of them are gone on to college with scholarships. Nobody's talking about that enough. Right. And we have the opportunity, we have the goods, but we can't get our media brothers to recognize this in a way that tells another story about the North Side, and a greater story about the state of Minnesota and its representation in the NFL. I won't even talk about. I won't even talk about the Super Bowl brother Tyler. Yeah, I won't even talk about him.
Right.
You know, but I mean, I'm just giving you an example of one, and this is a small thing, but could tell a big story. And I challenge all my good brothers and sisters, professionals who are in the media, to recognize those stories from the North Side and not be afraid to tell them. Right.
Yeah. I love that. Sweetheart, we literally have like a minute and a half left. And I want to make sure I get a closing thought from Miss Leslie, just maybe a closing thought of what can we do? What can we do? Mike talked about, police officers, be more human, get out, shake hands, go to community meetings, get to know your people. Miss Leslie, what would you say? Just give me a thought.
Don't complain, activate. Recognize that everything, but everyone can do something and pick out the role that you play, whether it's educating, whether it's reading a book. There's so many ways to activate.
I love that. Miss Rowena, just a thought from you before we close out tonight.
Everyone is worthy of respect.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Respect everyone.
Everyone.
And until that person gives you a reason to not respect them,
yes,
you
ma'am,
treat them like Mike's mother said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sweetheart, I hear you telling us that we've got to change the narrative. Change the narrative of the North Side and begin to really tell the story of the brilliance of this people. And it is a brilliant people. It is a brilliant people. I just want to thank you all for joining me. This is the beginning of a conversation on racism in the room where it happened, racism and the criminal justice system. Here's what I want to say to our audience. It must be eradicated. We got to get it out. And we have to get to the place where we treat everyone as human beings and we give everyone a true, fair chance to be well and whole in our society. Chad, my husband, Brother Shane, thank you so much for co-hosting with me. I appreciate you. I love you. Chad, thank you so much for coming into this space with me. I really appreciate it. Mike, thank you for telling your truth. Miss Leslie, Miss Rowena, thank you all. And we're out for tonight. In the room where it happened, conversations on racism that matter to all of us. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.